What is up, everyone? I am Dr. Ray Gorman, joined here by Nick Loera. Nick and I synced up a while back, probably just over a year now, I would say,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit longer, working on a project with our friend Daniel, and we've kind of stayed in touch. And Nick has honestly been a game changer for me in the content game. So Nick's background is, all things media, video, lighting, editing. And I was obviously super impressed with his work when we worked together on the first project and found myself in a scenario where I was kind of like, what do I do? Like, how do I strategize my content? How do I create content in a way that doesn't feel like I'm creating content that is truly authentic, and ultimately that doesn't cost me a lot of time? And Nick and I have kind of worked through a couple iterations of this process and this system that we've created together, and have really made it probably about like 3 clicks of a button to get the outcome at this point. So, Nick, if you have anything that you kind of want to add on kind of that intro, please, and then we can kind of move into like what we're doing and how we're kind of getting there.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you, first of all. And yeah, I feel like we've really kind of had I guess, a working relationship where I've also learned a lot too about just how to make this process a lot more efficient
Yeah.
and how to make it appealing for people to gain their time back so they can focus more on their business.
Yeah. I think the big takeaway, like overarching theme here is the people that are going to be watching this, like you're already doing things that are content worthy,
Hmm.
right? And so now there just needs to be a process of turning that content into something digestible. I think that's really
Hmm.
the key here of like, for me, it's I'm doing a call like this, and full transparency, my phone is set up right behind the computer. It's plugged into the wall, it's recording, and I have the option of just sending you the link to this video and having you chop it up, which could get me, I think like an hour of content for us. We're kind of in the 9 to 12
Yeah,
reel range.
definitely.
So for every hour of content I'm creating, I can get 9 to 10 digital assets, depending on obviously the length that we want them.
Hmm.
And sometimes you'll even send them to me and I'll like clip them up into 2 reels and that actually gives me 3 points of content. I got the long and I got the 2 shorts.
Yeah.
So one of the kind of methods that we use is really leveraging what people are already doing that can be turned into social media content um, with like their daily activities. What are kind of some examples that outside of what you've done with me? Because again, it's easy for me to talk about that, but like let's broaden the scope here.
Hmm.
Like, what are some projects that you've worked on where you've kind of taken what we've learned together and implemented that on a different level or scale or client type?
Yeah, well, I think it definitely depends on where your business is at right now, right? I mean, you're obviously at a place where you're having a lot of calls with clients, you're recording a lot of lectures, and you're a guest speaker a lot of the times,
Yeah.
and that makes for super valuable content. I think for people who are, maybe a step down from where you're at, it's like you said, finding things that you're already doing and just creating a system to convert that into content. So, a few easy ones that I think a lot of people are doing and they're not extracting as much value as they can be is, the first one is really just discovery calls and consultations. How
Yeah.
do you get a new client? You have to talk to them first. You have to explain your process to them, and you kind of have to sell them without directly selling them. You have to get them to trust you so that, you can ensure that you're going to reach their goals. And that right there, that process, that conversation that you're having, that's valuable content already.
Yeah.
A few other easy ones. I mean, if you already have clients, you're likely checking in with them either via text, email, or phone call. Again, those are conversations where you're probably providing a lot of value. You're answering questions, alleviating concerns, or even just providing, strategies for how to implement the things that you've given them to do.
This is something that I don't think people think of as content, right? Like you could literally get a $10 tripod from Amazon, set it up, side angle, do your check-ins, put a trending audio over it, and literally like talk about the what you are checking in with that client on. Right.
Mhm.
So it could be like, here's a behind the scenes of me checking in with my client Nick, who's struggling with X, Y, and Z. And the way that we're solving that problem for them is A, B, and C. Like, that's an example of what I mean when I say like you have content already, you just need to turn it into something digestible. And I think people are like, well, I don't want to start with this like talking head content, right? I don't feel comfortable talking into a camera, which, is a skill set that you have to develop over time. And you have to know where to look. You have to remember that there's like a pause at the end of each segment so that, your editor can actually get a good exit point or a transition process. But what I want to highlight there is like going back to the basics, whatever will give you the highest likelihood of putting pen to paper, pressing play, like creating action is really the starting point. Do you have any tips of like if somebody had a blank slate and let's say they were like using a Google Drive or their iPhone, and maybe this is something that you actually do already, like how would you kind of recommend that they organize that content so that they could like get in there and say, I need a clip of me training. I need a clip of me behind the
Mhm.
scenes. Like I need something static versus something, video.
Yeah. And I think this process gets a lot easier when you start in the macro and you work down to the micro. And I know that's something you talk about a lot. So from the macro, what is your overarching goal that you want to work at? And that can span a quarter, that can span a year. And how can we break that down into months? So now those goals are getting a little more specific. And then you break that down into weeks and days. And now once you're broken down into a week, okay, the focus for this week is to hit this point or drive home this message. Now, let's say you want to post 5 times a week, so Monday through Friday. Well,
Mhm.
what are you going to do Monday through Friday to help drive home that message, and what content is going to support that? So once you start with your big goal and you can work your way down, it gets a lot easier.
And do you kind of recommend that, like for me, I basically have 4 folders in like my Canva, right?
Mhm.
For the process that I use when you send it to me is my virtual assistant, she basically puts that in a spreadsheet, and then I have like a use classification, right? Where it's like, what was this content about? Was it used? Yes. And now I can just go through and checklist and say, okay, I'm hammering on this. Um, do you have anything set up like that in your phone as far as like a good process of, creating a folder for A, B, C, and D, and then moving that into a used category? Is that like a strategy that you use?
Yeah, definitely. I think categorizing the different types of content, and that can be from two different angles, right? The medium of content, whether it's written or video or however you want to go about that, and then the message that's behind it. What type of message is this content hitting? And I think
Perfect.
being able to organize along those two categories is really helpful for when it comes time to pick your actual content. It's
Yeah.
what message do I want today? And what medium do I want that message displayed in? And
Yeah.
then you should have, your folders are already pre-organized by that category system. Now you just pick the one that stands out to you.
That's something that I need to do in my phone is kind of organize my albums so that when I actually go in there, I want to start creating a little bit more movement based content. And the last thing I want to do is be scrolling through, 8,000 photos to find a video of me squatting, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think the other thing too is when you use content like that, there's content that is kind of meant to be fleeting, and then I think there's content that is like meant to be evergreen.
Mhm.
And I think that's another really good thing of like if you put 4 clips of you doing different training with like a tweet template over it, you could use that thousands of times. You could put educational content over something like that where, it was catchy with the transitions. you could use that hundreds of times and change the order. Like
Mhm.
there's so many ways that you can start to get creative in this, in the use case of this. Um, so the next kind of starting point is, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but like identifying a medium of content
Mhm.
that you want to start with.
Yeah.
And I'll speak to where my process started and how that evolved into you and I working together. But like for me, it was a newsletter. And the intent of the newsletter was something that would nurture my audience weekly, that allowed an exchange of information both ways, right? So you give me your name and email, I give you content via my newsletter. That then turned into a newsletter becoming a blog that released, way later. That turned into a blog becoming a carousel, right? Like an Instagram swipe post. That turned into a carousel becoming both static tweets and real tweets. And that was kind of where in my brain I was like, I'm recording this content. And I think what actually happened for us was like I was having difficulty recording a course.
Mhm.
And so I was like, hey, can you make this look good and splice these things together? And you were like, do you want me to like clip this up into like Instagram content for you? And I think my mind was like blown.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. These are things you're already doing, so might as well as
Right.
get the most use out of it as you can.
Yeah. And I think the highlight point there is like, you're going to feel like you're giving your content away because it's what maybe is behind your paywall, but you're not giving the curation of it away, right?
Mhm.
You're not giving all of the content away in a process that is systemized. Like you're giving these snippets of what it looks like behind the scenes. And I think that's like something that you kind of have to get over as a content producer, is like
Mhm.
you want to give your stuff away, right?
Yeah.
But you want to make that stuff good so people are kind of attracted to work with you.
Mhm.
The the biggest thing that I think you and I consistently talked about in kind of our pre-production meeting of this call was like getting clear on the avatar.
Mhm.
Um, what are some things that you've kind of experienced in the realm that like you've seen work well for clients, not work well for clients? Like what are some things that we can kind of chop up there to deploy out?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, this has worked both for my personal business and for clients that
Cool.
I work with, but getting as specific as you can. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
people talk about niching down and getting specific. And I think where people kind of get held up on that is, well, I'm just making my audience size smaller and smaller. We live in a big
Yeah.
country, we live in a big world. You can't get too small, you know?
Yeah.
I think the more you can get specific with who you're trying to target, what problems you're trying to solve for them, and what they look like on paper, the better chance you're going to have at finding those people specifically and getting them to use your process.
Yeah, and I'll kind of go through the example that we have here, but like I want to help people feel better. Well, my first question is like, feel better with what, right?
Mhm.
So for me as like a physical therapist thinking through it through that lens, it's like, well, I want to help people who experience low back pain feel better. Okay,
Mhm.
well, that's still like so broad,
Yeah.
right? Because like how do you want to help them? What are the things, and the way that we kind of talk through this is like, what are the things that they are already doing that I can leverage with them to help their process of getting better?
Mhm.
So for me, that's somebody who actively participates in strength training, because I know that through a virtual setting, I can help that person with high success. So now I've narrowed in on, if you're struggling with low back pain when you deadlift, that's very specific, right?
Mhm.
If low back pain is holding you back from training, that's very specific. If your back blows up in X workout, that's
Mhm.
very specific. Like we can start to narrow in on that problem and actually speak to a specific person.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think like you said, narrowing it down like that, it's really going to give the client or, or whoever you're helping the most benefit to, because you're solving a real issue that they're facing right then and there.
And I think sometimes we get carried away with like the level of problems that people have, right? Like what's classified as like a low value problem or a high value problem. And that's kind of some language that I've started to move away from, because problems are proportional to the experience that the person is undergoing. So it's a big problem if somebody can't, get on the floor to play with their grandkids, for example. Um, but it could be equally as big of a problem if somebody can't go to the gym and train like how they want, because maybe they don't have grandkids. So that's not really like a problem for them. So I think that, in the consumer realm, like don't shy away from something that maybe another influencer is saying isn't as valuable as a problem, because I promise you there is a C for you to pull from with a client that you actually want to help. And you don't need to go down the route of, well, so and so says this is a higher value problem than this other account. Like figure out the messaging for who you want to help, because that's going to keep you engaged in the process.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And, like I said, bringing it back to how it's helped my own business. I mean, I used to create videos for just about anyone who would come my way, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
that's the early stage. That's how most people get
Yeah.
started. And I've found that the more I've niched down into fitness and a specific type of fitness, even within that, you kind of become an authority in the space, and you can leverage the things that you already know to help sell your product or your service.
The biggest selling point for me sending it to you was like you knew what was good content. Like you knew what to pull out, right? Whereas if I was to just send this to a general video editor, I may have to say, like, I might have to send timestamps. And if I'm sending timestamps on the content, like I may as well just clip it out myself.
Yeah.
So like that's a great example of how you leverage your niche in the fitness space, because you literally speak the language that I'm trying to deliver the content in.
Yeah.
So, that's why I'm excited to kind of open my audience up selfishly. But I'm excited for you to open up the door to my audience and kind of say like, hey, like, look, Nick knows what he's talking about. Like he's going to know where there's good content to clip, and it's going to save you so much time.
Yeah. And I think that really, back to the point that we were talking about earlier about, finding a method of creating content, it's finding what you're comfortable with and what you're passionate about, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I've been doing fitness like stuff since I was 14, and even before that, like, you know, younger kid sports. And so fitness has just been a big part of my life. And so if I can revolve my business around that, I have my passion within my business already. And
Yeah.
now I know what I'm talking about based on personal experience, not just on working with clients.
I'm glad you said that. I literally on the podcast I recorded yesterday, I said you don't learn from education, you learn from experience.
Yeah.
And I think too many people are, especially in like the content realm, they're like, I need to learn more about what I'm doing. And I'm like, no, like you just need to put out a really shitty reel so
Yeah.
you can figure out what you can do to make it better next time.
Yep.
And then you put out a slightly less shitty reel and you figure out how to make it better next time. And then you start following some accounts that are super helpful, and they're like, hey, make sure your lighting looks like this. Try, use this audio and put it over that. And now it's like content creating really becomes more of a, okay, I know the process and it's more automatic than like I got to sit down and spend 2 hours.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So super, like you got to suck. You
Yeah.
just, you have to. Um, let's see what you have some stuff here on like gear. That's not
Mhm.
really something that you and I talked about, but I'm interested to hear like if I'm just looking to get started, what are some of the gear requirements that maybe I need? What are some of the settings that like you and I kind of went through to sharpen up the quality, sharpen up the audio? What are some recommendations for people who aren't media pros? but are wanting to kind of
Yeah.
start there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first of all, what I'd say is start with what you have.
Yeah.
Don't worry about upgrading to new gear or buying new gear until you know how to use the things at your disposal. So let's say your phone, and you know how to get the maximum, capabilities out of it. And now you know, okay, now I'm going to upgrade to get this new capability or this new feature. So that's what I'd say first off. But I mean, really all you need is a phone to start creating content. And I think, you speak to that really well because the majority of your content is created
Yeah.
either on text or on a phone. And
Yeah.
so you can scale massively with just a phone and just knowing how to set it up, when to set it up, and when to click record. Getting into the details a little bit more, I mean, you most of the newer iPhones and Android phones, you can go into the settings and change some of the settings for how it captures video. That can make it a little easier. But I mean, even then, that's kind of getting into the weeds when you don't have to just to start. Like you said, you got to suck first to get better, and that's the only way you're going to get better.
Yeah, I think people are like kind of shocked when I'm like, yeah, I just use, I have an iPhone 14, right? And the only thing that this like changes for me in the process is now that I am creating way more content with my phone, like I'm not going to upgrade my phone tomorrow, but when I do upgrade my phone, I'm probably going to lean towards like the one that actually does have the better camera next time.
Yeah.
Just because price per minute used, it's the cheapest thing I own. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like if you think of it like that. So when I'm shifting that investment process, like that's probably something that I'll look into. I have an iPhone 14. I have it set on 4K, which
Mhm.
is just a camera setting that you and I kind of went into and changed. That's just what like the frames per second or whatever it captures in.
Yeah, yeah. 4K is just the quality, and then you can change, like you said, the frames per second. So if you're working with someone who does video, they can give you best recommendations for that. But if you're just starting out, I mean, a quick Google search, what's the best
Yeah.
video settings for this specific iPhone? It'll come up right away. So I would just start with that and just kind of play around and see what works for you.
Yeah. Once you have the content, I
Mhm.
think the thing that you kind of touched on, and I am like a dinosaur in the way that I strategize my content. Like I don't I shy away from like using like a planning software or anything. Like I like to see things laid out. It drives my wife crazy because she'll like make this really nice Google document with our itinerary, and I'm like, I need a scratch piece of paper, right? Like I want to be able to in real time not have to delete, like write stuff, make notes. So I actually do that for my content, and I kind of do that monthly. So giving like a bigger picture view, this month, let's just call it 4 weeks. I kind of had four main topics of each week that I was going to kind of talk about from an enrollment strategy in my stories, right? A
Mm.
way for me to capture data. So the first week was just announcing that I had a new program going live. So some of the content that I was putting out kind of supported this hype for this program. The second week is now an opt-in for this content to kind of gauge interest. So again, content is a little bit more specific. The third week is more talking about what I do in the digital industry with physical therapy and rehab. So that's actually this week's content. So if you go and look at my content this week, we're filming this on January 19th. You'll see a lot of content specific to digitalization, talking about burnout, really trying to get the message across of the problem that I solve. And then next week is like an invite into the Facebook group. So it will probably be more community oriented type of content. And that's just a super helpful way of me to like streamline what's going out in each week.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think again that's working from your macro down to your micro. I mean,
Yeah.
when you get it to a place where you can have specific focuses of each week, then you just tweak the message just a little bit, or you add just a little bit of context to what you're talking about, and it can totally support that.
Yeah. Do you ever have to help people kind of strategize what they're going to talk about? Or are you typically working with somebody who kind of comes to you with an idea and you're just bringing that to life? Like, does anybody ever come to you and you're like, we need to get more specific with that? And if so, are there like questions that you typically ask, in your screening process?
Yeah, I mean, I really get people from from both ends of the spectrum, right? I mean, ideally people are coming to me and they have an idea at least of what they want, and I can help them bring that to life. And that's my bread and butter. But if they don't know where they need to go and they're just like, hey, I need to create better content, where am I going to start with that? Well, it starts with what your goal is. Is your goal to get more clients? Is your goal to highlight your community? Is your goal to sell this program or this service? Once you find the goal, that's where the content revolves around. So if we're creating content for social media and you're trying to get more clients to sign up for you,
Yeah.
cool. Now the goal, that's the goal, and we've established that. How can we showcase that through your content? Maybe you have client testimonials, maybe you explain your process one day, maybe you show in person what your clients are actually doing, and you kind of just give insight into every part of that journey until the reaching towards that goal, right?
That's perfect that you said that, because one of the first things that I talk with my clients that I'm working with through like a business mentoring capacity, or even in my course Retain, is understanding the client journey.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you basically have these different points in the timeline where, if you're trying to capture the market share of somebody who is in the exploratory phase, right? Like they're figuring out who to trust is how I look at that. And so maybe they're going through a couple pages, maybe they're on the explore page. You want content that is eye-catching, content that is relatable, content that draws them in. That's going to be a little different than somebody who's more in like this discovery phase where they're really like testing the trust,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they're dipping their toe in a little bit more with your content. Maybe they're commenting, they're liking, they're sharing, they're DMing you, they're responding to polls. And then you're moving them into what I call the commitment phase. So for the most part, we're building content that is attractive, that speaks to the problem that the client solves, that gets us the opportunity to have a conversation with them, to connect and ultimately determine if we can solve their problem with whatever it is we have to offer. So I think kind of looking at that from like a timeline perspective, I like how you said, like, you really want to create content for somebody at each point in the journey. And that might even be like a good starting point of, what would you say to somebody who has no clue what you do? Well, you got to create a post that says, I'm Dr. Ray Gorman and I do X, Y, and Z. And then it's, if you're experiencing A, B, C, and D, the solution is elemental P, right?
Yeah.
Like you're literally moving them through that process over time, over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I think this process starts to repeat itself, whether that's on a yearly, quarterly, or monthly basis. I mean, especially in the fitness space, there's not many new things, new
Sure.
revolutionary ideas coming out in fitness. Things are tried and true for a long time, and so it's okay to get in the mindset that eventually you'll hit the same messaging again, and maybe this time you just approach it from a new angle, or
Yeah.
maybe you're just trying to find new clients so that reusing that old content works perfectly.
Bingo. That's
Yep.
that's the key right there, right? Like you want to make your process easy, start making stuff that is reusable in X amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that literally just replaces a week of work for you, or whatever the time frame is. Um, perfect. Perfect. Let's talk a little bit about like what you and I do and that content system, because I think that's super actionable for somebody who is um, thinking of this process, maybe has an editor that they work with, or maybe wants to connect with you. But basically, when we started, I think I was like sending you everything via like a Google Drive.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was recording it from my phone, like I was having so much frustration actually getting those recordings to get into the drive, because they were like hour-long files and they were in 4K, so the quality was super high. Um, I don't know how this would work on an Android, but we're both Apple users. And so the amazing hack is sharing an iCloud link with you.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, I know that sounds like so silly, but again, I think that's like the dinosaur brain in me here with like technology sometimes. But that literally like changed the game for me.
Mhm.
because it went from this process of frustration of uploading, whether it's uploading to an external hard drive and then external hard drive to a Google Drive over to you, because we're not together, right? You're in Central California and I'm Southern. Um, but that changed the game.
Yeah.
So what are some of the like efficiencies in that strategy that you've noticed that you've carried over with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, first one is finding the way to record it, right? What's the simplest way to do that so that it's easy and convenient for you? And then, like you said, how do we get that uploaded? I know
Mhm.
for some, some people who maybe don't have iPhones, they might get a little frustrated with that, but for us, iCloud was the easy solution. And
Yeah.
we could have probably gotten a little bit more complex and found something else that worked, but this was just right in front of us. And once we used it, we really saw how quick and easy it was. I mean, for you, I'm pretty sure you just click share and send a link and boom, you're done.
Yeah,
And
I can literally click share iCloud link, text it to you, and then say, hey, can you cut this up into however many reels you think you can get and send me an invoice, and then it's over.
yeah.
And then you send me a link with the videos, and then I just have to categorize them. Like that's literally the process,
Yeah.
right? Like that's how simple we've made this. I think from a financial perspective, that may not be accessible to everybody, but you can work your way up to that,
Yeah.
right? And also like you could say, hey, I need, $500 worth of reels. Like, can you cap me at whatever you get through and
Mhm.
prioritize this section of the video? But when I send it to you, I send you content and I'm like, I can use this for months. So, it's a good batch process for me.
Yeah. And when I work with clients like yourself and others who are in this space and create content this way, that's really the two methods that I approach billing for them.
Yeah.
It's if you're just you want to get as much content out of it as you can, then cool, I'll send you an invoice after the fact.
Yeah.
And full transparency on it. I'll make sure you know where all the hours went so that it's nice and clear. And if you instead have a specific budget that you want to stay in, then you can let that be known to me or to whoever the editor that you're working with and say, hey, I have this amount of money to spend. Can you get as many reels until you work up until that amount of hours once it translates into hours and kind of
Yeah.
working your way backwards.
Yeah. And I'm sure that you also potentially have retainer processes with clients as a third option,
Mhm.
where I could say, hey, I want to pay you flat rate per month and I'll send you X amount hours of video and you just got to chop it up, and then it's kind of on me to get it over to you and you to get it over back to me.
Yeah.
So there are so many accessible ways to make this process work. Um I think we kind of wrap this with like, let's talk a little bit about who this process is for, like where they're maybe at in their content journey, because you had some really good ideas for me as far as like, I know some of your clients maybe at different points of the spectrum, different areas of the spectrum. But what are like kind of the top three bullet points of who this process would be for?
Yeah. So I think, kind of starting at the bottom, if you don't have anything and you're not making content, and if the primary reason is because you're scared to get in front of a camera, I think this is going to be perfect for you because, well, I mean, supposing that you're passionate about what you do, first of
Sure.
all, right? If
Sure.
you're passionate about what you do, the messaging is going to come out once you get comfortable and once you start speaking. So if you're scared to get started, we're going to help you create a system that you feel confident in. And like you brought up earlier, it's really about finding that medium that works for you. And cool, how can we expand on that so that you're still creating content within your kind of comfort zone, and then you're pushing the boundaries by turning that content into different forms of media. I think beyond that, some people are already making content on social media, and if we're just being honest, maybe it's just not that good yet,
Mhm.
and that's okay because that's part of the process, right? You got to start somewhere and you got to kind of suck in order to get better. That's the only way through it.
Yeah.
So again, this is going to help you create systems that make your content more efficient, and it's going to help you kind of strategize, okay, what is actually valuable content, or am I kind of just putting something out there just to put it out there? And well, that's a good starting point. I think we want to move past that as soon as we can. And then the third kind of person that I think this would really work for is if you're already creating good content and you know your messaging, you know what kind of messages you want to hit on a weekly basis, and you're doing it, but it just takes too much time away from your business. Again, this is going to be great because we're helping you create those systems to make it efficient so that it's, you know, and I think you spoke to it earlier, 3 clicks and you're done creating content for a
Yeah.
whole month. And so that really is helping you kind of buy your time back to focus on your business, where the goal is to make more money that route.
I think the last, kind of what you touched on as far as like the comfort with it, when I think about what I'm talking about and the message that I'm sending and the sphere that I kind of operate in, like I've been living, eating, breathing this stuff since 2008, which is really when my coaching journey started. So the stuff that I'm talking about is a language for me,
Mhm.
right? And I that's honestly like kind of what I tell people is like, look, you're trying to speak a language that you're learning.
Mhm.
And as you get better on camera, as you get better with your sales pitch, as you get better with your discovery calls, really all you're figuring out is like your fluency,
Mhm.
right? You're literally just becoming more fluent and you're able to say more with less words.
Yeah.
Like that's the magic.
Mhm.
So I think for those of you who are listening to this, like if you want to start getting comfortable, you have to start doing uncomfortable things.
Yeah.
You have to start filming yourself doing a pitch. You
Mhm.
have to start filming yourself giving the lecture. You have to start, you know, auditing how many filler words you're saying and then intentionally removing them from the process.
Mhm.
You have to start mastering your pauses, your tone, your expression. Like you have to see yourself.
Yeah.
That's a weird, uncomfortable process, right?
Yeah, I mean, I still cringe to this day every time I hear my voice in my headphones. It's just it's something you just got to get over. But yeah, like you said, the reason I like to start people off inside of their comfort zone, which I know kind of seems contrary to what you think, is because that's where the messaging is really going to come
Yeah.
out. And once the messaging is out, cool. Now you have something to work with. You're not worried about, am I going to fumble my words? Or, well, if you put a camera, you might, but you have the messaging and you know what you want to say, and that's really the good starting point, and that's why we work in your comfort zone to start. And then once we take that message and start converting it into different forms of media through different other mediums,
Yeah.
that's where you start to push the comfort zone and you start to expand a little bit, and you say, okay, well, I know what I want to say, I know the points I want to drive home, let me practice this in front of a camera now. And you
Yeah.
start getting comfortable in those different forms of media.
Yeah, I think a good example of that to bring it to life would be that's the difference of, miking yourself up with like a wireless lapel that you could get on Amazon and recording a session with a client where, maybe the camera is 10 feet away from you, right? And you're just like in the moment. You're just coaching, you kind of forget the camera's there versus going into the camera, looking into the lens and saying, this is what that session was about. This is what my client was experiencing. These are the problems that we solved, and this is the way that we did it. Like that's two totally separate processes as far as invasiveness of the camera. And I think starting on that, camera's 10 feet away, audio is really what we're looking for. Maybe we kind of slice the audio over some background, some B-roll, right? Now you've got a starting point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, for that starting point, we really want the barrier to entry to be as low as possible. So again, that's why we're focusing heavily on things you're already doing and now how can we optimize those. But there comes a point where you have to kind of realize that you're going to have to sit down and create content for the sake of creating content. The nice thing is this system makes it a lot easier for you.
Yeah.
But again, at some point you do have to sit down. And I think for you, where you're really sitting down and focusing on content is in your newsletter. And
Yeah.
that's kind of working in a medium that you're extremely comfortable in, you're confident in, and you know how to get your message out in a way that's passionate, right?
And even that process went from prior taking me, 90 minutes to 2 hours to 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Like it gets efficient. You have to stay with it. Before I kind of summarize this like overview, is there anything that you want to say that we kind of left out before we kind of wrap?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really about, you know, you're going to have to create content if you want to start leveling up your business, and especially if you want to create a digital footprint. You know, as you move your business from in person to online, you have to have a social media presence. And the thing is, it doesn't have any kind of specific way that it needs to look.
Yeah.
It's more so about the message and the passion that you show into your social media content, as opposed to the quality, visually how it looks. That's important, but you'll build your way up in that category. What really matters is that you're getting your messaging out, you're getting your process out, and you're showing people why they can trust you.
Yeah. Perfect. So to kind of summarize this, if we're looking at the system from a macro into micro, it's know your avatar and the problem you solve.
Mhm.
Create content that is specific to that avatar. And sometimes I literally will tell a client, like, I want you to think of who that is. Like that avatar is a person that you've probably worked with that hits 9 out of 10 or 10 out of the 10 criteria. Like just act like you're talking to them, and you probably will start to pull experience from them. From there, go kind of macro to micro, right? So what does a year look like? Just like in strength and conditioning training, what does a year look like? What does each quarter look like? What does each month look like? What is the topic of the week? What is the content of the day? That
Yeah.
will help you kind of get silos of what medium you're going to use, how you're going to use it. Like, for example, today on my list was talking head reel and static tweet, and then there'll be a testimonial in my story. That's literally written on my notebook here, right? So the 3 mediums of content that I'm delivering through. And then expanding that is figure out the epicenter of content that you're going to expand on. So for me, that's my newsletter. For you, that might be, your story, like your Instagram story. Maybe that creates a post for you, or it might be a post, which then creates a story, which then creates a reel. Spread that out over the day. Um, and then once you kind of get beyond that, now figure out your system to scale content, right? So that's investing in a relationship with somebody like Nick, or an editor that you already work with, or an on-site person. Even I wish you were on site. You and I could be on site and we could shoot some content. But that's really kind of taking the system and bringing it to life. And so, we'll upload this to a couple platforms and we'll kind of see where we're at. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself. I'm at Ray Gorman DPT. Nick is at nick.loera, Loera. And you can find us both on Instagram, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. So, Nick, thank you for your time. Thank you for putting together this document, which I'll also figure out a way to share with everybody. And I think this is probably like the first of many of these chats.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for this. Yeah, this was really well, I hope this was really insightful for the people listening.
Cool. We'll get some feedback on it.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you all for listening. Please leave us any feedback, like Nick said, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah.